Finally, the Tethren melee bug has been patched. We can now fully embrace the real power of the Weaponmaster's Pact. This short update covers everything that's changed. The new melee playstyle options, the combos now possible, the current bow situation, and a few quick notes about weapon choices and bugs. This isn't a full Tethren guide, it's an update. If you need the core mechanics explained, check out my full Tethren guide on the channel. Now that melee functionality for Fellust has been restored, you can once again use your default melee attacks to both build stacks and benefit from them. However, heavy attacks still consume 3 stacks while providing no damage bonus, so in short, never use heavy attacks during Fellust. Otherwise, the system works exactly as before. A miss or blocked attack will deplete your strike pool without adding to your multiplier. Melee attacks are excellent for building your first 3 stacks. They are fast, easy to time, and thanks to autolock on, they rarely miss. Ranged attacks in comparison are far more prone to failure when enemies sidestep, perform sudden animations, or move their head just far enough off your crosshair. Even better, melee finishers, backstabs and parry counters not only benefit from your active Fellust multiplier, but also add to it, dealing massive damage especially when executed at high stacks. The one exception is when you are cornered or outnumbered. Melee is highly vulnerable to disruption in those moments, especially when you are staggered by ranged attacks, hit from the side, or when the lock-on system decides that the better target is the one standing 4 meters behind 3 other enemies. Suddenly, you are swinging helplessly into the air while your Fellust strikes get burned for nothing. And as if that wasn't enough, a single area blast from an archer or caster can interrupt your animation and cause the exact same waste. That's not just a Tethren issue. It's a general melee problem in Soulframe, but for Tethren it's particularly punishing, since even a short stagger during your attack window can burn multiple strikes. But there's actually a way to counter that weakness. The Orbitblades can act as your safety net, turning those chaotic, interrupt heavy fights into something you can control. Normally, when you activate your Orbitblades during Fellust, they scale off your current multiplier, but burn your strikes over time. That's why we usually activate them at stack 4 or 5, when they hit like a lawn mower made of lightsabers. However, what if you want to use them defensively, not for the damage, but for the stagger and crowd control they provide? The slow and smite procs from the blades can act as a protective zone, letting you fight safely in melee range. Here's the catch. If you cast Orbitblades before Fellust, then activate Fellust and switch to your melee weapon, Fellust will not enhance the blade's damage, but will still consume stacks over time. Bad trade. But if you reverse the order, it changes everything. Activate Orbitblades first, then switch to your melee weapon before casting Fellust, and voila! Fellust forgets that the Orbitblades are already active. You can now attack freely with your melee weapon while you're spinning barriers, daggers and slows everything around you, marking entire groups for smite and lighting the battlefield with glowing targets. Problem solved. To recap, Orbitblades, switch to melee weapon, then activate Fellust. Your most powerful 4th and 5th actions are still not basic melee strikes. Heavy attacks don't work with Fellust, so while melee build stacks quickly and hits hard, it's not the most efficient way to use your strikes. Executing a perfect melee weapon throw, ideally on a weak spot hit, or triggering Orbitblades during Fellust with a high stack multiplier will deal far greater burst damage than simply continuing to swing. For the most efficient combo, go for quick 3 melee hits, then while your target isn't right next to you, unleash a short tapped Orbitblades as your 4th strike, assuming your precast blades have already expired. Otherwise, use it at your 5th strike, or skip it altogether depending on its remaining duration. Using it as your 5th would technically deal slightly more, but this method keeps your last strike free for a melee weapon throw, which would otherwise consume 3 stacks if used earlier. You will have to time this fast. Orbitblades begin consuming stacks quickly, so activate them from a short range, then immediately switch back to your melee weapon and throw it. Don't hesitate or you will lose your final strike to the spinning blades. After that, simply charge into the remaining enemies while your blades are still spinning, swinging your melee weapon alongside them and enjoy the chaos. Your own personal whirling chainsaw tearing through everything around you. If melee gets too risky or a boss hits too hard, replace your first 3 melee strikes with flyblade throws instead. And whenever possible, weave in parry counters or finishers for maximum carnage. damage. And honestly, that's what makes Tethren so fun to play. Pulling off this entire chain in perfect succession, timing throws and counters while keeping Fellust active feels incredibly satisfying when it all comes together. Now about weapon choice. Since total damage is limited by strike count, attack speed doesn't matter much. What you want is high damage per hit. We've got a few new 3-star options. Marrowbane looks especially promising thanks to its courage attunement, while the Valiant is grace aligned, so not ideal, unless you re-attune it via Blessed Joinery. Technically, Marrowbane isn't a bad choice at all. Its longsword moveset hits hard and you can unlock the skill to parry heavy attacks, and its perfect throws are easy to time. Personally though, I fared better with the spear animations, especially since the initial running thrust comes out incredibly fast and leaves little room for enemy counterattacks. That said, it really comes down to preference. Damage-wise, Marrowbane should still end up slightly stronger per swing than the 2-star Courage Spear Dukalik. Overall, I would call it a draw between the two. If you have a Courage attuned Gathanan, that one will likely outperform Marrowbane. But ultimately, your melee weapon choice depends on how well you handle its moveset. Pick your poison: high damage per swing, courage aligned, and comfortable to use. And now, an important totem warning. If you are using the red totem in your offensive slot, it can currently break your Fellust stack building due to its area damage. That AoE splash can interfere with the stacking mechanic, causing Fellust to malfunction entirely. Skip it until it's fixed. It took me a while to find out why Tethren was working fine on some weapons but not on others. With that out of the way, let's look at how the bow scales in this new environment. Most of you have probably noticed that Arrow Rain no longer works with Fellust. And like all multi-hit abilities, it suffers heavily from armor, often hitting below the armor threshold and dropping to 1 damage per tick, making it useless for pure DPS. So how does a bow play now? Arrow Rain no longer builds or breaks Fellust stacks at all. You can use it freely without worrying about ruining your combo. It also highlights how much better melee could feel if heavy attacks simply weren't counted toward Fellust either. With the current totems, you can push Arrow Rain to very high smite chance and slow enemies to a crawl using the Duck Totem, letting you start every fight with an Alkat's Breath rune trigger from those early smites. The slow effect also makes it far less likely to miss, further improving consistency. So instead of spamming Arrow Rain non-stop, it's now best used as a setup tool, followed by carefully aimed shots. In terms of class fantasy, that's honestly a win. The days of brain dead hail spam are over. Now you actually need to aim and be good at it. Fully charged bow shots deal a surprising amount of damage, actually a bit more than their raw stat profile suggests. If you compare them directly to high damage melee weapons, bows get higher numbers per hit fully charged. However, the melee weapons build Fellust stacks so fast and unload all that damage in such a short window that they will have finished their entire rotation and be waiting for Fellust cooldown by the time you are still charging your third shot. So even though bows hit harder per shot, melee can burst through a boss in seconds. You can quick tap the bow for faster first and second stacks to reduce wasted time on low damage shots. It helps compensate a bit of that early ramp up delay. Melee feels more reliable in controlled situation, and as mentioned earlier, a precast Orbitblade can help keep things under control. But once chaos hits, especially with multiple ranged enemies, it can fall apart fast. Bows have their own set of weaknesses to manage. The first is moving targets. Some are just painful to hit, like the Race of the Wasters. You are usually better off handling those up close with Orbitblades to paralyze them. The second problem is constant interruptions to your charged shots. Odedogs constantly snapping at your legs can ruin your day, so take a few quick snapshots to clear them out first. Aside from that, you can operate safely at range and control the fight, though the risk of missing is always higher, with enemies constantly strafing, blocking or sidestepping mid-shot. And then comes the key question: body shots or headshots? Body shots are consistent, but headshots are an entirely different story. They can outdamage melee's build-up phase by a mile. The problem is Soulframe isn't built like a precision shooter. Enemy heads constantly move during their animation, and if you miss a headshot, you will likely miss entirely instead of hitting the body. Maybe I'm just bad at sniping. Headshots were always my weak spot in shooters. Well, hitting anything was really, but let's not nitpick here. The bow skill ceiling is high. Miss once and you cripple your combo. You can play it safe and go for body shots. Right now, most enemies don't have enough HP to justify the risk, so body shots will usually do just fine, but the challenge is there if you want it. Melee, on the other hand, benefits much more naturally from parry counters, backstabs and finishers. You can weave them into your frontline flow if you develop the reflexes. Mastering that is basically the melee equivalent of landing perfect bow headshots. Both are high skill paths that massively increase your output. Rune access for both playstyles comes through their accompanying systems. Both can weave in arrow rain right before firing, creating smite windows and supercharging their next shots with runic power. Melee, on the other hand, needs to pre-activate Orbitblades to trigger smites and gain the rune bonus. Both deal so much damage with Fellust strikes that they struggle to generate smites naturally outside these auxiliary setups. Aside from that, the bow rune is simply stronger by default. At base level, it provides a plus 100% bonus that stacks multiplicatively with Fellust. When it comes to ending a combo, both will usually spend all 5 strikes on charged shots. You can use your 5th for an Orbitblade finisher if you are cornered or enemies are still standing, but it breaks your ranged flow, and enemies often die before that's even needed. For melee, you can chain 2 finishers in one rotation, Orbitblades as your 4th strike and a thrown melee as your 5th. The final throw follows the same logic as bow shots. It demands precise aim and in addition also timing, but a clean weak spot hit delivers devastating results. In general, Melee's playstyle is bursty and explosive, huge damage in a short window. If you can weave in parry counters and execute both final strikes, Orbitblades and the throwing finisher, nothing survives. It's quick, efficient and deadly. Everything works flawlessly as long as you maintain control. It shines in boss fights, yet in large enemy groups filled with ranged attackers, avoiding disruption becomes a nightmare. Focus on eliminating ranged threats first. Both, by contrast, are slower and more deliberate. They rely on charge time and rune activation through arrow rain for peak performance, but reward that setups with enormous hits. They feel more tactical and controlled. Prioritize mobile melee enemies that try to close the gap and interrupt your aim. In the end, it's hard to measure which one truly wins. A perfectly executed melee burst with parry counters and precise throws, or a fully rune boosted headshot chain. Realistically, nothing in the game right now will survive either one. We'll probably have to wait for level 100 enemies to get that answer. Until then, play what fits your style. How has your experience been with the restored melee options so far? Do you still stick mostly to ranged combat, or are you experimenting with optimizing your rotation? Or maybe you're just happily spamming left click and enjoying the fireworks without breaking a sweat? Let me know how it has been for you. Hope this cleared things up a bit. If you found it useful, leave a like and a sub, and if you want to catch future pact and build updates, feel free to stick around. See you in the next one.